So we just really exploded in the area of emotional intelligence. And the goal there, I wanted to bring that into the workplace. I wanted to use it to help develop people, develop leaders, individual contributors, managers, to really reach and touch upon skills that really weren't being talked about in the workplace. Like emotional skills. I was laughed out of England. I remember giving a talk in London at HR conference where some old guy yelled at me, "In England, we don't have emotions at work. We leave them at home." It was like unbelievable when we started doing this. So, but we really pioneered the field of emotional intelligence.
Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tenser, CEO of SpyderWorks, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Dr. Steve Stein, award-winning author, founder and CEO of MHS, Multi-Health Systems, a leading publisher of scientifically validated assessments for more than 30 years. Like this video if you enjoy our show, and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Dr. Steve Stein, welcome to Say Hi to the Future. Well,
nice to be with you, Ken.
So Steve, let's start by shedding our Canadian humility a little bit. You are, and MHS is one of the most noted success stories in Canadian entrepreneurship. In Canadian entrepreneurship, 3-time Profit 100, fastest growing company in Canada, 2015 EY Entrepreneur of the Year for Health Sciences, and one of Canada's best managed companies since 2013. Do you just put that out there? Like, what is the story behind that? Because that is quite a resume. I mean, I like to visualize things, but I'm not sure I could have visualized that type of enduring success.
Well, we've worked hard. We've been a little bit lucky, and things have worked out this way. It was never really my intention to go the direction of business.
So what was it then when you started MHS? Like what did you do then, and what was your intention?
Well, it was kind of accidental. I mean, I'm a psychologist, and I was happily working as a psychologist back in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was just kind of accidental. We were doing some research at a children's mental health center looking at adolescents, really difficult, challenging adolescents. And as part of the research, I had this large grant. We had to do pre-tests and post-tests and follow-ups to see how they were doing. Well, these kids were really tough kids, and they refused to do my pre-tests. So that was making my work really challenging. Around that time, there's these two Steves in California, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, came out with this little thing they called the Apple II computer. So I just had the idea, if maybe we put these tests, these pre-tests on computer, maybe the kids would be more willing to do it. So I went ahead and we programmed them, and lo and behold, the kids loved it. And not only that, but they provided more information than I could have ever dreamed of. We published a study showing they admitted more in terms of sexual abuse, physical abuse, drug use, suicide intentions to this computer in an hour interview than to like 10 clinicians that they've seen prior to that. So I thought, wow, this is really something. There's a new direction here. So then what happened was I tried to convince the treatments at the hospital that we should change our direction. We should focus more on this assessment stuff. And they said, no, we want to do the treatment outcome stuff. So I decided to pursue it on my own at home. My wife, Rodine, was home on maternity leave. We had our first daughter. And we just set up a little company, hired a programmer and he worked out of our basement, and started programming some of these little things. So that's how we began in 1983.
You know what the great thing is, and it's funny, first, thank you for sharing that. But when you talk about starting as your first child was born at home, it's actually the story of my first company. And it really, we can get into a long discussion, which is not for today, about entrepreneurs and how we're wired. But boy, are we crazy, or did we actually know what we were doing? Who knows?
I don't know if we knew what we were doing.
So MHS, over the years, tell me a little bit about how it's developed, because we talk a lot about passion on Say Hi to the Future. We talk a lot about passion and savage curiosity. And one of the things that you speak to quite a bit is improving the quality of life for individuals and communities, using your assessments for very passionate, good reasons, if you will. So there really is that core behind everything that you do.
Yeah, we really are passionate about the products we choose and the directions that we go in. So we've gone in several different directions. When I first started, the area that I started focusing on was ADHD. One of my colleagues, Keith Connors, was a world expert. It wasn't even called ADHD in those days. It was called minimal brain dysfunction. No one knew really what it was, but Keith had developed a rating scale that became kind of the preeminent rating scale for measuring this thing, which became ADHD. The first studies on Ritalin used the Connors rating scales. We published Keith's scale. We were friends, and he was having a hard time. He was actually giving it away for free, and people were chasing him when he's traveling around the world giving lectures for his free questionnaires. So we took it over and we helped commercialize it. We helped improve the normative base, put a manual together. And that was our first thing, was really helping to not only identify kids with ADHD, but to help direct in terms of the right treatment. So many of these kids get neglected, or especially at that time, got neglected. And, terrible things would happen. They'd have no friends. They'd be excluded. They'd lose out in school. They'd fall behind. So that was kind of our intention, to help guide these kids to the proper treatments. And we're quite successful at that. Unfortunately, over time, ADHD has become overdiagnosed and overprescribed, and that's probably because a lot of people aren't using our scales. But our goal was to really get a handle on that. The second area that we branched into, another colleague of mine was doing a lot of work in the criminal justice system and trying to look at dangerous offenders, and as they're being released, how much supervision people needed. Some of them needed a lot of supervision because they're very dangerous, and some, they did a crime that didn't require much supervision. They were pretty reliable. So they developed a tool that helped probation officers and correctional officers determine the level of dangerousness of these people, the level of services inventory, and the other tools, the psychopathy checklist. So we published those. And again, those were leading in terms of the field. There wasn't a lot around that could successfully look at the risk level of offenders. And that exploded. That's our whole social justice or criminal justice area of tools with offenders. Then the third area we got into was the area of emotional intelligence. And what happened there is a lot of our work up until that time was, as a traditional psychologist, focused on the negative. We're dealing with ADHD, we're dealing with conduct disorders, we're dealing with anxiety, depression, all the negative stuff. So I felt, boy, it's time we start looking at the positive. I mean, what makes people succeed in life? What makes them achieve things? And that's when, on a trip to Israel, I was giving a lecture on computerized assessment, and I met psychologist Reuven Bar-On, who was trying to publish this tool that was his PhD dissertation back in the 80s, something called the emotional quotient. And he was rejected by all the major publishers in the US and in Europe. And it was the kind of thing we were looking for, needed a bit of work still. And we decided to work with him, and that became emotional intelligence. So we basically published the world's first tool of emotional intelligence. So when Dan Goleman's book called Emotional Intelligence came out in 1995, we were there. We're the only ones in the world that had a tool that measured this thing. And Goleman knew about our tool and actually had referred to it on a number of occasions. So we just really exploded in the area of emotional intelligence. And the goal there, I wanted to bring that into the workplace. I wanted to use it to help develop people, develop leaders, individual contributors, managers, to really reach and touch upon skills that really weren't being talked about in the workplace. like emotional skills. I was laughed out of England. I remember giving a talk in London at HR conference where some old guy yelled at me, "In England, we don't have emotions at work. We leave them at home." It was like unbelievable when we started doing this. So, but we really pioneered the field of emotional intelligence and have been strong since. And one new area I'll just mention that we've just got into now in our educational division is the area of gifted. So in assessing gifted kids, we've noticed there's a lot of bias in the tests that are used, and the research shows that teachers are biased in the kids they select for these gifted programs. And gifted programs give kids a chance to really use their abilities to their fullest. A lot of gifted kids get bored in the regular classrooms. So with some experts in the area, we've developed a tool that we've now demonstrated picks up kids from various cultures, races, African-American kids that are not being picked up by traditional tests of giftedness. So we're getting a lot of excitement now coming out of the States in terms of our ability to identify these gifted kids who were never identified before, who were neglected, and to really help them reach their full potential. So, these are ways that we see helping the community, like really making a difference in the world.
I love that. And when you talk about gifted, it really, as the work that I'm doing is around human ingenuity, clever, inventive, original thinking, trying to understand how people think in situ. And when you talk about gifted that way, you really seem to be taking the bias out and really getting down to the core. How do you start peeling away the layers of that onion to define what gifted really means?
Well, we take away a lot of the verbal aspects, and a lot of the assessment is nonverbal. Kind of think of cartoon strips or things where it takes some kind of creativity or social knowledge or whatever to really put the pieces together or to compare different things that seem disparate. A lot of the problem has been sort of the language that's gotten in the way of traditionally looking at gifted. If your parents don't use a broad vocabulary at home, then you lose out. Or, if you're not exposed to books, if they don't read to you. So this way, it's more graphic and pictures and things that kids who don't have that ability to read as much or that training are able to see, to flourish and see relationships between things and identify them and be more creative in terms of the way they identify these relations.
Very cool. Very important. Thank you for that. Taking a step back to emotional intelligence, because I think this sort of leads us in part to resilience, which we'll talk a little bit about because you're speaking at our conference in September. Emotional intelligence, I think, one of the things you said was in Britain, somebody yelled at you that we leave our emotions at home. You know what? I've got to say that in the past that was probably true. I think that my father very much could have been that person in that room yelling at you. I know when I got into entrepreneurship, and he was a very successful longtime entrepreneur, and he was a wonderful mentor to me. But when I got into entrepreneurship and looked at how we work together, how we build teams together, how emotional intelligence plays into innovation and entrepreneurship, he said to me basically the same thing. He said, it's your business. Why are you asking? So I understand the changes that are afoot these days, but seriously, the pandemic, there is no home anymore. There is no home and office. There may be 5 seconds when we're clicking our Zoom or our Teams on, but really there's no barrier. So to me, the intelligence, the ability to turn on and off, if you will, to create a barrier, that must be just an extreme area that we need to be looking at these days.
Yeah, it's just huge. And, that ability to be aware of your own emotions, because during the pandemic, some of us just truck on, nonstop and don't take a time to look after ourselves. And then being able to express ourselves appropriately. We sometimes don't think about how we come across to other people, and that can be quite destructive, even though we may not intend to be. The other area we look at is interpersonal relationships, our ability to understand others. This is we've done some research over the course of the pandemic, showing that one of the areas that tends to suffer is empathy, that leaders aren't really paying enough attention to what their subordinates are going through. And that could be one of the many factors that leads to the great resignation. It's like, you don't really care about me or what's happening. So we found that there's been a decrease in empathy that leaders are having during this time. The other area is decision making, how emotions influence our ability to make decisions. There's a huge body of research showing the how influential emotions are, even in what you think of as a very logical decision. It's influenced by emotion. Regardless of how logical a decision is, your intuition, your gut feelings, these are all important aspects. And finally, stress management, your ability to really manage stress, not to be overly impulsive, to really, be able to take a temperature of the room and manage those stressful responses of yours. All these come together in terms of what we measure as emotional intelligence.
And when you have that shock of a pandemic, do you have to set a new baseline as to where or how we should be working or living, or is it truly just finding our way back to the original baseline, if you will? I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly.
Oh, you're pretty good on that. Yeah, we've been measuring it continuously throughout in all these areas, the mental health side of it, as well as the emotional intelligence and hardiness and other factors. We've been measuring constant throughout the whole pandemic. I don't think we need a reset, really. We've seen some dips and valleys during the pandemic. We've actually seen some areas where leaders have actually risen to the occasion. We've seen some where they've, for example, increased their assertiveness. They're more assertiveness in terms of what they're telling or how they're communicating to others. Some of them are even have increased their stress management. They've been better at managing stress. So it's a continuum. We constantly measure, we constantly look at what the norms are, and we kind of interpret against what's happening in those norms.
And let's take a step now into resilience. You are going to be a speaker. MHS is a big part of Say Hi Mississauga Path to Resilience coming up September 22nd. Resilience is a word that's bandied about a lot these days. The way I introduce it, and we'll look to you for a better introduction, I think about the Weebles. And I think you'll probably remember that toy. Back in the 70s, Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. And I tell my kids who weren't quite old enough to take a look for them online. And I say to them, for me, that's resilience, that we keep getting knocked down, pushed around, that things happen to us. And there's sort of an emotional, a physical, a life elasticity where we have to find our way back to, accepting what is. And for me, that has always been resilience. And that little toy has always held that sort of place in my head of, got to get back up, got to find our way to get back and get regrounded. So, Steve, you probably have a better way. So what is your take on resilience and what it means?
Well, I think your analogy is actually pretty good. So the way I see resilience, it's really that ability to experience, withstand the stressful situation and bounce back to where you were at the beginning. The research we're doing is slightly different from that. We're looking at a concept called hardiness. And in the hardiness world, what we're doing is also you may experience the same stressors and challenges, but you come out of it ahead, you come out of it stronger. And that's how we differentiate resilience and hardiness. So hardiness and hardiness, the concept is based on about 25, 28 years of research. And most of that research actually has been done through the US military, where it's been carried over and looked at, and my colleague, where they looked at resilience or hardiness in leaders and predicting successful leaders. They've also looked at post-traumatic stress disorder. People have gone through extreme stressful situations and come out not only as they were, but even stronger. And it basically consists of 3 C's, the whole area of hardiness. The first is control, and that's all about knowing what you can control and what you can't. Some people under stress, they want to change the world. You want to change climate, you want to change things that are way beyond your control as an individual, and that's not a good use of your energy. So knowing what you can control, which is usually your own reactions to a situation versus what you can't. The second is what we call challenge, and what we found there is people who do well under stressful situations, they look at it differently. They don't just get overwhelmed by what they're seeing, but they see it as an opportunity, as a challenge to learn something, a challenge to overcome something. It's almost like you're doing a puzzle. They come out ahead of the game because they figure something out in the process. And the third is what we call commitment. And commitment essentially is similar to having a purpose, something that a bigger goal. I'm going to get through this. It's a bit of optimism. I'm going to get through this because of something that's more important to me. We looked at, like, for example, prisoners of war, and those who were more patriotic and believed in their country were able to more successfully come through the situation. We did in our book examples such as John McCain, who was a prisoner of war, and the thoughts he had during that process that had him come out even stronger than he was before he went in. He had awful situation as a prisoner of war. So hardiness is what we're kind of researching and looking at, which we feel goes a little bit beyond the typical resilience.
And how does that, on a business level, you hear, and again, not sure I'm using the word right, but we talk about the burnout coming out of the pandemic. We talk about the fatigue factor coming out of it. What you're talking about with hardiness is almost, again, a flip to the positive, if you will. How do we help ourselves, our teams, those around us make that flip, if again, that's the right terminology?
Yeah, that works. So we just completed a study looking at burnout and hardiness during the pandemic. And one of the biggest links we see between them is the area of commitment, actually. So, and especially in healthcare, where we've been looking at the huge burnout in healthcare professionals, the ones that seem to do better, that seem to last, are those who kind of see themselves on a mission, that they're out there to save humanity, to benefit the world, even though they're overworked, just like the other ones, and go through a lot of the same fatigue and stress. They have this larger mission that guides them. The ones who don't quite make it are those who see it more as a job. I'm working as a nurse practitioner or as a whatever, and it's just a job, it's a paycheck. Those are the ones who are less likely to make it without the burnout. So it's interesting as we look at it. And as you say, it's kind of a flip. We have to look at the positive side. What's down the road? Why am I doing this? What am I here for? What is my purpose? And that's a big factor in these things.
Well, I love that. And it's funny, our whole team, when we get together and we talk about our Say Hi activations, we want people to leave this day and start to think to themselves that I can do anything I set my mind to. And we hear that a lot, and we're told that a lot as children, but I think that sometimes life might take that away from us. And I think the last few years has. And I think that is what we're really going after today, is bringing the positive back to the participants, to help them, whatever it is. We're doing resilience here. We're talking about equality or inequality in another city. We're talking about talent development in another. And just to leave with that feeling that I can take on whatever it is I set my mind to. I might not choose to, and that's okay. Or I might choose to do just a small step, but I have that confidence that I can do it.
Very important. Keeps us driving. We have to be motivated, and it's that sense of purpose or commitment that we feel gives you that sort of the extra gas in the tank to get you there.
So Dr. Steve Stein, as our time is coming to an end today on Say Hi to the Future, there is one last part of your incredible background that I'd love to ask about. you've worked on a ton of reality TV shows, psychological expertise, candidate screening. What can you share? I mean, we watch these with like, wow, where did it's like, is it real? Is it not real? Where did the people come from? What can you share with us?
It's my guilty passion. Yeah, I work on dozens and dozens of reality TV shows. I must have interviewed several thousand applicants and tested them. It's a fun area to be working in. And, you know, the range of reality shows really varies. But to me, it's like, you know, I like to look at it as kind of little scientific experiments. You know, we do our upfront assessments and we select people. And then we see how they do, right? And I like to, for fun, we make predictions based on our assessments. It's like doing HR, but in real time. Like you got, you know, 10 weeks till everyone's eliminated, and so there's a winner at the end of the show. So this gives us real data to look at, you know, as opposed to hiring someone and waiting until they eventually get fired or whatever. We do it in very brief time, 5 to 10 weeks. So it's great to see how things like our tests really work, our ability, you know, the importance of emotional intelligence, of hardiness, of IQ, of all the different factors that we look at in selecting these people. I didn't know there were so many people willing to put themselves out there for these crazy shows. I mean, it's unbelievable. And of course, one of the top things that you find in a lot of these people, as you would expect, is a certain level of narcissism. I mean, I don't think you would do this kind of thing, Ken. You wouldn't put yourself out there on one of these shows to do that. But some of them are a lot of fun, and they're challenging for sure on an emotional level, on a social level, and some of them are skill based. You know, we do cooking shows and adventure shows, and you know, all kinds of things like that. It's a fun area.
Oh, it sounds like it. Anyway, I will look at those shows in a whole new way now, Steve. So thank you for that. And thank you for being on Say Hi to the Future. And we look forward to hearing you live in person. And September 22nd at Say Hi to the Future, A Path to Resilience. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Very exciting. Looking forward to it.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.